Welcome back to Between the Edits. My name is Grace, and today I have the joy of interviewing Natalie Palmer. She is an independent author focusing on clean teen romances. So she does have a full series out called Second Kiss. And then she also has a standalone novel called But Then You Stayed. So I'll pass it over to Natalie here to tell you a little bit more about herself.
Hi, I'm Natalie Palmer, like she said, and I am a mom of four kids, and I've been writing fiction novels for about 17 years. I started actually when I was pregnant with my first kiddo, and he's about to graduate from high school. So, been going on for a little while, just kind of a hobby on the side as I was, whenever I laid my kids down for a nap, that's what I did, and here we are, four books later. So,
Oh my gosh, I love that. So your entire writing career can be, aged right alongside your firstborn, right?
yep,
Oh, that's
exactly.
super cool. I love that. So then that actually like perfectly leads into one of the questions I had for you, which I've been loving asking this question recently, which is reading and writing, which came first for you?
Well, definitely reading. You really can't write without reading, right? Let's see. I would definitely say I write more now, even though I miss reading. I miss being able to sit down with a good book and just get lost in it. But of course, that isn't as easy being a mom of four busy teenagers. And so when I do have a second, I tend to write because that's where my love is now. But definitely started with reading for sure.
Gotcha. So when you were, first like, falling in love with reading, what were some of your like favorite things to read?
Oh, let's see. Well, I started with Ramona Quimby when I was
Okay.
little. Third grade, I loved staying up late reading that. Got into the Goosebumps series until it scared me to death, and I remember locking it in a cabinet because I got so scared. Moved on to Boxcar Children and all of those little elementary school books. When I became a teenager, so I'm actually a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints here in Utah, and there's a lot of fictional books that have like the people from our church would put out. So I kind of fell in love with those for a time.
Nice.
I would say one of the books that was the most influential to me, actually, though, as a writer, was A Separate Piece by John Knowles. I had to read it in high school, and I remember when it was assigned to us, I thought, "How boring! This just looks like the most boring book." And that I always reference A Separate Piece as the book that opened my mind to fiction isn't just how to get from A to B, in a storytelling. It's actually like poetry. Fiction can feel like you're reading
Oh,
poetry. I loved that book. I've read it several times. It's influenced me as a writer. So I feel like that's when I kind of started maturing a little bit more with what I would read. And it kind of just expanded into there. I actually majored in English literacy at the University of Utah. Don't ask me all the books I've read because, man, there were a lot. And honestly, I will be completely honest. I'm not the best reader under pressure. If I feel like I have to read because I have a book club coming up, I've tried several book clubs, majored in English literature. And if I feel like there is a timeline, it takes away all the joy and I don't want to do it. I feel like my entire body rejects the whole thing. And so, as much as I should have like this huge list of all the books I studied in college, I wasn't super great at it. But one thing that I realized I was good at is writing essays. And so that's why I majored in English literature. I could do a lot better at writing essays than I could at taking tests. I was not a great test taker. So that kind of all of these things kind of developed into this writing career of like, hey, I can write. And I do love books. There's nothing better than getting into a good book. But like I said, if I have pressure, it becomes work and not joy. So it kind of shuts my brain
yeah.
off a little bit.
I can relate to that a little bit. I don't have the same, well, okay. When it comes to like the book club thing, I feel like I've got a little bit of the same kind of thing going on where it's like I feel a little bit of hesitancy or whatever, like or reluctance to like pick up that book and like read it on the deadline and everything.
Yeah.
So I struggle with that a little bit too, but more so if people give me a book recommendation and I hear it multiple times, for some reason there's something in my brain that goes, no.
Yeah.
So it's like the
Not
more
for
people
me. It's
recommend
too
it, I'm like,
popular.
exactly. Yeah. So
So what's
I
your
got a little
favorite
bit of
book?
that.
What kind of books do you read? Am I allowed to ask you questions? I'm interested
Yeah,
in
absolutely.
what's your favorite book?
So it's always so hard, right, to pick one. But my go-to always for that is Graceling by Kristen Cashore.
Oh, okay, I've never
Um,
heard of that one.
Yeah, so, it's funny because, like, my name is Grace, and Grace Ling is the name of the book, and so, like, I always feel like people initially assume that that's why, but, I think that's why it was a gift from my grandma when I was, much younger, I think probably still early high school. I think she bought it for me because it had my name in it, but I read it and I completely fell in love with it, and
Yeah.
so it kind of inspired what I call my legacy bookshelf, and so people who have watched stuff from season 1 will know because I talk about it a good bit, but it's like these are books that, like, have impacted me in a very specific way and that I want to, like, pass on to my children, so they become part of my legacy bookshelf. So this is the book that started that, so I kinda have to give it the props for favorite
Very
book.
cool. I'll have to look it up. Grace Link? Is
Yeah,
that what you said? Grace Link.
Grace Ling. Yep.
Okay.
It's really, really good.
Cool.
Yeah, so I highly recommend that. Um, but you started to mention that you realized that you did really, really well writing essays, right? And you're like, "Okay, I've got a knack for writing." How did that translate into, becoming first-time mom and taking those nap times to start actually becoming like, writing a book, becoming an author? What was the shift for you that changed from, "I can write essays really well," to, "I wanna write stories?"
So when I was in college, I remember struggling to figure out what I wanted to actually major in, what I wanted to do with my life. I knew I wanted to be a mom. That was a big part of my career choice. I knew I wanted to stay at home with my kids. And so it was really hard to figure out like what career can I have if I have that possibility of being able to stay home with my kids. Of course, you don't always know that going into it, but that was my hope. And I remember
Mhm.
a specific conversation with my dad. He said, Natalie, if you could do anything like in your spare time, what would you do? And at that time, I had a lot of friends in college, just from life that lived further away. A couple of us were keeping in touch through emails. And it happened to be a time in my life where I was dating a lot. People were setting me up on blind dates. I had, different things going on that were kind of those fun romantic stories. And I was emailing these friends, and they were so long. And my friends would say, I love your long emails. They're like novels. You should write novels someday. And I'm like, and I think I heard that enough and I loved doing it enough. I got so excited writing these emails about these funny dates I was going on or these embarrassing moments that I thought, honestly, if I could do anything in my spare time, it would be writing my friends these emails about just like the funny goings on of my life. And so that's really kind of what translated into maybe I want to write. And I kind of knew that I was already good at it with some of those essays that honestly I should not have been getting A's on. I wasn't a great student, I'll be totally honest. So the fact that I was getting such good reports on these essays was like, okay, maybe that's something I should run with. So anyway, that's really what started it. And so I decided to major in English literature. And anytime somebody would say, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? Or what's your plan for the future? I would say, well, my hope is to be a mom, a stay at home mom, and write books while they're in school. And so my plan was in the future, like wait till they grow up, wait till they're in school. And I actually had a teacher once, well, it was a professor, but she said, "Why are you waiting until your kids are in school? You can write right now." And I was like, "Oh yeah, you're right.
Mhm.
I can write right now." So I was pregnant with my little boy still at the University of Utah. I actually had a really good job there where once the work was done and we could work on our homework and I think I had already graduated, still had the same job. So instead of homework, I started working on my book. And that's what I would do with my little baby in my belly in my office there at the University of Utah. I started working on Second Kiss, my first book.
I love that story. And again, I can really relate to you on that aspect too of I finished college and kind of had that moment where I realized like I really want to prioritize family and becoming a mom. So I knew that I would gonna want to make some choices that made that easier, not harder for me. And so I was faced with that same kind of question of like, what can I do, now? But that's not going to make it more difficult for that end goal later. So I just did some like office admin jobs and now I'm transitioning into doing, more of this kind of like podcasting and developmental editing and, author services so that, that is something that I can scale up and scale down and be freelance. And so,
So
yeah,
cool.
I
So
can, I
you
can
have kids
totally
now?
relate
Do you
to
have
that.
kids?
No, I actually just got engaged this
Oh,
Christmas.
congrats.
Yeah, so we'll be getting married this summer. So
Well,
by the time this comes out, it'll still be coming up. I won't be married yet. But so yeah, I think all that will be coming down the pipeline soon, but not quite yet.
very cool.
Yeah, yeah. So I think one of the things that you kind of mentioned, so you've been doing this for 17 years, right? And you've got your second Kiss series out. I might have said earlier if I'm not sure if it's completed or if you are still coming out with more. Is that a
It's
completed
complete.
series?
It's complete.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you've got that completed series, you've got this standalone, and you've been doing this for 17 years. What is the timeline for somebody out there of like, I'm a mom and I want to write, and I'm writing during nap times too? Like, for you, realistically, what does that timeline look like for getting a book done in that time frame?
Well, that's a good question because I had very different timelines for my different books. My first book, the first 10 pages took me a long time, a really long time. In fact, I think I was still working on those first 10 pages when my little boy was up napping in his crib. We kind of had a tricky situation. My husband ended up doing medical school. And so in the middle of so I had a baby. My father actually passed away right before he was born, so we moved in with my mom. So just like anybody, there was like a million things going on. We moved to Iowa for medical school, and I was still on those first 10 pages, like, I got to get this done. And and I'm pretty sure I would say so my entire timeline for those first 9 years of motherhood and writing books is based off of where did we live? How old was that kid? So I can tell you I did publish that book with a small publishing company. I actually didn't self-publish that time. It wasn't a big thing yet. This was back in 2008.
Right.
And I it was a small publishing company called Tate Publishing. I published with them and it came out, I believe, in 2008. So I probably had the whole book written within, I don't know, I would say 6 months to a year. But then, of course, by the time they accepted my novel and I went through the whole process with them, it was probably another 9 months before it was actually out in the bookstores and online.
Mhm.
But my second novel actually was a lot quicker because I was so excited about it. My first book was selling and actually, like, was out there doing some stuff. There were lots of reviews. I was getting a lot of feedback. Somebody translated it into Spanish and German. I don't know who.
Mm.
I never got I never got royalties for those books. I don't know, but that was okay by me because I was never in it for the money so much. I was more in it like I just want to put my books out there for people to read. I was just excited that people were reading. So I was getting
Mhm.
fan mail from South America and Germany, people who
Oh
were
my
like,
gosh.
I mean, it was nuts. So I was so excited. So my second book, actually, I wrote that pretty quick. I think I had that one published and ready to go about a year and a half later or so. I mean, pretty quick is relative. For me, being able to just write when my kids are sleeping, it takes a while. You definitely don't have hours and hours just to write. But
Right.
the second book that I did through that same company, that same tape publishing, they had changed their ownership. It had passed on to the owner's son. Everything changed. I did not have the same experience. It was so good the first time, not so great the second time. I felt like that second book just did not get the traction that the first one did, and it was discouraging, and
Mhm.
by this time, I was pregnant with my 3rd child, and so and we had already moved to Ohio for my husband's rotations, and we were on our way to Arizona for residency with my 3rd kid in my belly, so, like, life got crazy at this point, and I was like, "Nobody's reading these anymore," like, it kind of flopped a little bit.
Mhm.
So I lost the passion for it because of the discouragement of feeling like nobody
Right.
cared and life was busy. So it took me probably like an embarrassing amount of time, probably 5 years before I had that 3rd one ready to go. And that's when I
Mhm.
switched over to self-publishing actually. There were things about that second book I didn't like how they turned out with that publishing company, and I still retained the rights to those books, and so I actually it was during COVID, I went through all 3
Mm.
books. So the first 2 books changed what I didn't like, republished those first 2 books with my new 3rd book, all in 2020, um,
Wow.
maybe 2021, right in that time. All 3 books came out kind of new with, like, my new self-publishing brand, new covers and everything like that. So, I loved having the control of doing everything what I wanted, not having to
Mhm.
depend on they would say, here are 2 cover options and you have to pick one. And I'm like, "What? That's not, what if neither one of them speak to me?" And I didn't like that. I didn't like that at all. So it was really nice to just kinda do my own thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's really cool feedback too, because again, people watching this, it's a common question that I see. Like, do I do traditional publishing? Do I do a hybrid publisher? Do I do self-publishing? And there's pros and cons to each of the options, right? So it entirely depends on what your goals are, what your preferences are, And so you having experienced a little bit of both of the traditional publisher, maybe on the smaller side, and then doing the self-publishing, it sounds like the things that you valued out of the process were on the pro side for the self-publishing then.
Yeah. I mean, if I
Yeah.
if it would have ended with that first book, I would have totally been, like, telling everybody, "Go and go to this publishing company, go," like, the small ones are great. I had an amazing editor. The whole process was awesome. But,
Mhm.
so it was kinda interesting to have the good side of it, and the second book was not so great. So, I don't
Right.
know. I love not having a timeline. I love, clearly I don't work well with that. I like just being able to do my own thing and be able to write when I have time and use my own creative juices to make the book look exactly the way I want it to when it's out on the shelves.
Right. Yeah, and I mean if that's what works for you in the creative process, I mean, the end result of the book is, obviously the thing that you're basing everything off of, right?
Yeah.
So if it works for that, then I think it's great.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So you kind of talked a little bit about some of the different obstacles and challenges, of having that second book not do as well and not having that great of a time with the publisher on the second time around, and then switching. And then you also mentioned you guys were moving around for your husband's medical school. So would you say that those were like some of the biggest obstacles and challenges kind of that you faced as an author, or are there other ones that maybe somebody else might be able to relate to?
I mean, those obstacles are always gonna be hard, but there were definitely I would say it was myself that was the biggest obstacle, my
Okay.
head, getting in my head, 'cause
Yeah.
there were always obstacles, nothing ever changed. I ended up
Uh-huh.
with 4 kids, we ended up going to Boston for his fellowship, and I kinda took some time off of writing, I just wasn't there mentally, and I think that that's probably if I could choose one thing that inhibits me from writing and getting stuff done, it's my own mental space. Like, where am I? Can I sit down and write right
Mhm.
now? Or is there just too much stuff going on in my head that I'm stressed about? I mean, but there were times when I was stressed when I was able to push that stuff out, and just sit down and it was
Yeah.
actually a release for me to be able to go sit and write. So I wouldn't say it was so much about what was going on around me as more like where was I mentally? And,
Mhm.
I've noticed, like, one of the biggest things that helps me is to move. Like, I started, going to a rec center, taking my kids to the little child drop-off space, and I would walk laps around the track, and then I started bringing my computer. This is actually how I finally finished that 3rd book that I was taking forever. I could not get it done. I would take my laptop with me. I had 1 hour that my kids could sit in that space down in the child watch of the rec center. I would walk laps listening to music and imagine that next scene in my head, and for 30 minutes, I was like 30 minutes walking, then they had, like, a little office space where you could work on your computer if you needed to, and I'd whip out my computer and write for 30 minutes. And I did that several times a week for a long time, and that's what really pushed me through, and I was like, "Man, I can do this, I think better, and I'm more creative after I've been moving and walking and exercising." There was so much more oxygen to my brain, so that's a huge thing I
Yes.
tell people, get moving for sure.
Yeah. Oh, again, I love that. That's also kind of reminds me of a question that I love asking people is specifically for writers. There are some writers who are like, they need to be in the exact same environment every single time. So they have their desk and everything is the exact same and they have their schedule. And then that's where the creativity comes, right? They thrive off of the routine of it. Whereas like some other people are like, they need to change up where they're at. They need to go move. They need to go do this. They need to go do that. They need to move in a different area. And then that trips the creative juices again. So it sounds like, I mean, the routine worked for you to an extent a certain extent, right? But do you feel like you're more of, like, routine-oriented writing, or are you more of, like, changing up the environment type vibe?
I could write anywhere. I have written lots of chapters sitting in the car waiting for my kids at piano practice or whatever it is. I
Yeah.
just kinda take my laptop everywhere. I tend to work better when I have kind of that 30-minute deadline of like, "Hey, I have this amount of time till they get back in the car." I love being
Uh-huh.
at home. I'm a homebody. If there's anywhere I could be able to be at home. The problem with that, I have this whole desk set up where I can do my writing. It feels so good. I made sure it like had that writer's ambiance. And my
Yeah.
kids are all at school now, so I don't have to worry about that. But sometimes sitting in a quiet room at home makes me fall asleep. It does not bring on those
Uh,
creative juices as much, especially I have my cute little golden retriever here next to me. She'll lay next to me and she'll fall asleep and her breathing, her breathing, sleeping, breathing, I'm like, and I find myself just nodding off. So I personally, I can write at home and I have written at home, but I work better if I go to Starbucks. I like having people around me. I'm sipping on my hot chocolate and having all that sound around me helps me actually focus. It's probably some ADHD going on or something. I need that help focusing, but that's where I do my best work is if I'm out and about. That's why the rec center worked so well. I don't know. It's just whatever you can make work. But yeah,
yeah.
I'm not someone who has to be in the same place every time. I work better if I have almost like commotion going on around me and I'm like focused
Mhm.
in on it. So everybody's different, but that's how I work.
Yeah. I think so we had a couple things in common earlier. I think I'm gonna be different from you on this one. I find it really hard to work in public spaces because I'm just like, who's looking over my shoulder? Who's
Sure.
reading the scene? I'm just like, no, you don't know what's going on. Don't judge me.
Mm. Yep.
So I'm a little bit different from you on that one, which is okay. We're going to take a quick break from the conversation so I can tell you a little bit about a great product. I want to tell you about the Tertulia for Authors website builder. As someone who made their own website when I first started freelance editing, I can tell you that it took hours of frustration to end up with a website that had half the functionality of the Tertulia for Authors website builder. This resource is specifically designed for authors, whether you're published or not. It's easily customizable, incredibly user-friendly, and puts vital marketing tools at the fingertips of authors, like blogs, event calendars, reader magnets, and email lists. And it's really affordable. So if you're an author looking to establish a website for the first time, or an author who already has a website but is looking to switch to a more manageable software, use the affiliate link in the description to sign up with Tortulia for Authors. Using this link does help support the podcast and is greatly appreciated. Now back to the podcast. Speaking of earlier, you mentioned your husband did his fellowship, so you guys spent a little bit of time in Boston area.
Mhm. Yep.
And so I was doing my researching, and that's kind of the setting inspiration for your standalone novel, But Then You Stayed, correct?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, so I actually, my fiance's family is from the Boston area, so
Oh,
when
no
we go up
way.
to visit them, I've
Cool.
gotten a couple of trips up to the Boston area now, and I recognize like the name like Ogunquit, which I think I'm pronouncing correctly, and
Yep.
everything like that. So I was like, ah, I've been there. I know where that is.
Mhm. Well, my favorite thing to do is to write about stuff that I already know, that especially places I love. My first book, actually, Second Kiss, I had never been to that location, but the whole
Mhm.
book is based off of my own personal embarrassing moments. I told you it started with writing emails to my old friends
Right.
about kind of embarrassing dates and things. That whole book is basically my life fictionalized. And it's real experiences kind of combined into, certain things happen with different guys and maybe I combine it into one guy or whatever. But I was a little boy crazy growing up, but terrified to actually talk to boys. And so it brought a lot of angst and a lot of a lot
Uh-huh.
of those like funny little locker experiences where I was at the wrong locker, frantically trying to open it and it's not opening. And the boy I like is standing there and he's going to see that I can't even open my own locker. And then he comes up to me and he's like, "Why are you opening my locker?" I mean, this is stuff that like really happened that I was accidentally opening my crush's locker and, just things that were just so fun. I wrote in my journal endlessly growing up, every day. So I can read back into my journals and it kind of spurs fun ideas. But the Boston thing, I have actually started leaning away a little bit with the whole writing about my personal experiences because I had so many people from my past writing and saying, "Hey, I remember that. Hey, you named this character after." I'm like,
Oh.
no, it got a little bit intense for me. I'm like, I don't know that I really want my journals out there in the open public. I don't think I realized how many people would read them. And so
Uh-huh.
with my last book, I think I definitely steered away a little bit from my own personal experiences, and so I put it more into a setting that was more personal to me. So, Ogunquit
Uh-huh.
was a place that we went for one of my husband's conferences when we lived out there, and I fell in love with it. So I wanted to write something about that little beach town, and of course, Boston, we lived just right outside the city near Cambridge. That's where my husband did his fellowship. So I just loved all of those cities and the trains. And we were actually, we took our kids back to visit Boston when I was sitting on the train there in the subway. And I thought of one of the scenes of that book because I just was like, that'd be perfect. It's one of the places where the main character and the main guy kind of have like their first little moment of coming together. And
Uh-huh.
so that's where these things come together is I'm just sitting on the train going, "Hey, this is a fun place for them to kind of realize that they're falling in love." So that's how my brain works. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had similar kind of conversations with a handful of other authors, like from, season one of the podcast where they were talking about the same thing, where it's like either you get the feedback where it's like, oh, well, this didn't feel like a realistic thing. But then the author's like, yeah, except it actually happened to me. And so then I wrote it into my story. Or what you're talking about, which is like you wrote personal experiences into a story, and then somebody who knows you and was a part of that experience reads it and they're like, oh, I recognize it. But then also they don't know what you changed, like about how the character responded to it as opposed to how you would have responded to it in the real thing. And so there's
Yeah.
always that little bit of a it's easier to write from personal experience, whether that be like actual events, people, or the setting, like you were talking about. But if you're talking about actual events and people, there's always that fine line of like, I know them. They might read this.
Yeah.
What are they going to assume from reading it without actually like knowing what I was, you know?
Exactly. Exactly. So true.
So
It's a
it sounds like
tricky thing to tread.
yes, yeah. So you mentioned like a lot of this kind of got started with you were sharing some of those experiences in long, fun emails with your friends. And so it kind of was spurred from that time period of your own life. Is that what kind of drew you to writing the clean teen romances? Did it become more important to you now that your children are in that age range? Or what was the impetus for focusing on that specific genre?
That is such a good question. I think even now, reading about just those teenage angsty love stories is my favorite. I mean, adults, they fall in love too, but it's not as fun. It's fun, but there's something about the coming of age. I don't know. I've always been drawn to that coming of age time, and probably just because you're trying to figure out who you are and what you want. And
Mhm.
so often, that guy that you think that you want isn't what you actually do want. You're just figuring stuff out. I don't know. I've always been drawn to that, probably because I wrote in my journal so much of that time. Probably because
Mm.
my best friend and I in high school were writing notes to each other and slipping it in the locker about what happened today. So I kind of let go of that a little bit as I got married and had kids. I wasn't writing in my journal as much. So I think my brain is a little bit stuck in that time of life when it comes to writing, and I still find so much excitement. My husband is the best husband in the world. I couldn't ask for a better guy, but he's very low drama, which I appreciate. In real life, you don't want drama. Low drama is great, but I think I
Mhm.
crave the fictional drama. And so I tend to revert back to those teenage years. Plus, I feel like I was really positively influenced by reading some books at that time, some teen fiction novels, where you kind of watch a girl go through a process of, you know, what type of a guy do I want to end up with? And sometimes it's the bad
Mhm.
boy that looks the most interesting and the most fun. But I was kind of rooted in this idea at that age of like, I actually want somebody who I can trust. I want somebody who's going to be there for me, not the super exciting popular guy or whatever it is. And so that was another goal of mine to try to positively influence girls to be like, let's go for the good guy, even though that's not
Yeah.
maybe like the first option. But I don't know. I mean, I dated several guys before I met my husband, and I know how it feels to kind of crave that feeling of like, "Oh, I'm gonna change him, and he's going to be
Mm.
better because of me, and I'm gonna make him a better person," even though he's kind of the bad boy. And I'm not saying bad boys can't change, they can, and there's wonderful stories about it. But I would say for me personally, I learned like it's okay to end up with that guy. It's better than okay. It's wonderful to end up with that guy who's just consistent and
Mhm.
not leaving me hanging all the time, and he was just a good, solid guy. And so
Right.
that's you'll kind of see that theme a lot in my books where the good, solid guy is maybe a little bit in the background. He's written after my husband. I'm always thinking, what would my husband say? What would he do in this situation? And he's maybe not the super exciting guy at first, but he shines
Mhm.
when it's most important. So,
Yeah. And I think that really dovetails nicely with specifically wanting to write the clean novels because there's a lot of books out there nowadays. I'd say even more so than there was even, like 5 years ago. Like there's just this explosion, of spice in books, and they're not always like, marketed that way forward. Now it's more of like the default. And so, like, I think a lot of teens are finding their way into these books and things like that. And so, not only are we getting lots of stories of like the morally gray character, right? But we're also getting lots of spice in books that isn't necessarily, appropriate for teenagers. So
right.
I think having not only like wanting to help shape their expectations of who is a good partner, who do you want to be in a relationship with, not just who is the most like high, high and low, low kind of thing, but also having those options for like those romances that give you that same like butterfly, happy, giddy feeling, but has a male, lead that is like a good guy and it's clean. Like I think that having more of those options be available for teens, especially today, is something that I think is really amazing.
Yeah. Because those good guys do exist, right? But
Right.
because
Mhm.
they don't feed into that drama, sometimes we don't notice them as
Mhm.
readily. They're not as big in our mind's eye sometimes for us girls who are kind of looking for that guy who gives us the exciting butterflies and stuff. And those guys tend to be a little bit more dramatic. And, sometimes I
Uh-huh.
watch movies and I think, I love this movie, but that guy in real life would be really hard for me.
Right.
The back and forth and the whiplash and I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm definitely the president of the fan club of good, solid, consistent guys.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny you may say it that way because, like, when I watch, the movies or read those books, I'm like, I'm rooting for them because they're the main characters, because I want that satisfying, like, them to be together in the end. Like, I want that satisfying conclusion. But at the same time, I would acknowledge, I was like, if I was in that scenario, I don't know that I would want to end up
Yeah.
with that person?
Yeah. Yeah. So true. But I guess that's
Yeah.
why we have fiction and that's why we have books and movies because sometimes it's nice to imagine that, that
Mhm.
bad guy can change and it's okay. That's
Right.
okay. That's why we have it.
Well,
But in
and
real life, let's go for the
sometimes
good, consistent guys.
yes. Yeah, well, and sometimes, like, depending on what story you wanna tell and the plot, like, you need somebody who's maybe going to act a certain way, or things like that, so, you're right, that it is the beauty of fiction for sure. So, as far as again, just another thing I'm really fascinated with in kind of the current state of self-publishing and everything like that, mentioning that so you have this emphasis on writing clean teen romance novels. How has that been for you since you've been writing for 17 years and, published originally with a publisher in kind of one general market, and now you're self-publishing in today's market? What have you noticed changing over time, and how has that impacted you as an author and wanting to specifically offer those clean teen romances?
I definitely think it's unpopular to it's been really, really hard for me to fit into a genre, I guess. I've actually
Mhm.
as much as I feel like there is a lot more spice, I also feel like the clean teen fiction world is building at the same time.
Yes.
So,
Mhm.
so there's like a closed door romance movement, that I've kind of entered into a little bit. I think for several years I was like, what is my genre? Because I'm Christian and all of my books have Christian values, but I wouldn't place myself
Mhm.
into the Christian genre because I don't talk about it a lot in my books. There's not a lot
Mhm.
about prayer or reading the Bible, and not that all of Christian books do that, but I feel like they do tend to saturate it a little bit more in those Christian beliefs. Whereas for
Mhm.
me, I've had people describe my characters as someone who maybe is a future member of my church or a future Christian, or maybe they're Christian, but they're still trying to figure it out. I feel like that's kind of, I don't ever really have them part of a specific religion. I don't really mention religion very much. The most that I put in there, because I love the Savior so much. I mean, I don't know. I'm super strong in my religion. It is my life.
Mhm.
And so it's important to me that my books show that, I guess, in a way, but I guess it's just, it's not my style to put the Lord's name in my books a lot. And I've actually struggled with that a lot too. Because I'm like, the Lord is the one who's making me be able to do this. Like any talent I have is from him. And so I want to
Yeah.
give him that honor and respect in my books, but I want to do it in a more subtle way. And so anyway, somebody had made a comment a couple years ago saying, "Hey, like you're writing these Christian books, but you're a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They're not very welcome to our religion." And so I've had like little comments like that of like, that's interesting. Where do I land? Because I don't feel like I am writing Mormon fiction, for lack of a better word,
Mhm.
but I'm also not in the mainstream Christianity. I'm just clean. That's all it is, you know?
Right.
There's certain times when my main character is struggling with like a parent that died, and she'll
Mhm.
have thoughts about like, I wonder where he went. I wonder if heaven is real.
Right.
And she might have a conversation with like, yeah, there is a bigger power. There is something bigger. But that'll be like
Mhm.
one or two conversations in the whole book. And that's really all I mention, just because it's important to me to kind of have those thoughts as she's trying to figure stuff out. So
Mhm.
I think that's been my biggest challenge, is kind of where to land. Who are my readers? But I feel like I'm more confident nowadays in like, my readers are any denomination. Some are religious, some aren't, but there are so many people out there who still want clean fiction, whether they're
Mhm.
Christian or not, whether they're a member of my church or not. They still want clean fiction. And I'm not even trying to say like, I wouldn't even say I'm super pro censoring or anything like that. I feel like there are people who are young teenagers who live in a totally different world, where a lot of those things that we find inappropriate are their daily life. And
Mhm.
I'm not trying to say that I like don't think that there's not a place for those books to help those people who are going through that in their life. My kids are extremely sheltered, for better or for worse. Now, I still feel like it's important to talk to them about things. I want them to be aware of what's going on in the world.
Mhm.
But if they were to open these books where, sexual intercourse is just blatantly on the page, or swear words and stuff, they would feel extremely uncomfortable with that. I know they would. They'd
Mhm.
probably feel more uncomfortable with it, more uncomfortable than I would, because sometimes I'm like, come on, guys, it's okay for you to kind of have a feel of what's going on in the real world. But my kids are like, they're not really ready for it. They are very, very sheltered. And so that's why anybody who reads my Second Kiss series, you'll see in book number 2, I actually have a paragraph at the beginning that's kind of just like a little warning for parents. And it's like, I write clean fiction. I'm not going to write anything that I work really hard not to write anything that's uncomfortable, but I do address those bigger issues. It's really
Mhm.
important for me to not hide the fact that there are people out there who want to take advantage of girls. And so in my book
Mhm.
number 2, you see that there are, and book number 3, that there's boys that she's dating who want more from her than she wants to give. And she's a little naive to that. So I don't go into
Mhm.
detail. I don't say words that are like super uncomfortable, but the theme is there, that I want people
Right.
to be aware, and I want people who are dealing with that to kind of feel like it's a safe place. It's not just kinda
Mhm.
like fluffy, surfacey stuff. It's important for me that we can dive deeper, but in a clean way that feels appropriate.
Yeah, like you were talking about, to represent real world scenarios that people are going to have to face and be confronted with in real life as part of just living in this world, but to not glorify it, or to, brush it off as if it doesn't have significance, right?
Yes,
If it's just this thing that everyone does,
I
kind of
love
thing.
that. Yeah,
That's
exactly.
perfect. Yeah. And it reminds me a lot as well of so season 1, episode 8, I interviewed Maddie Unruh, and she is pretty big on like Bookstagram and stuff like that. But her whole thing about her Bookstagram when she's reviewing books is she is a Christian as well, but she doesn't only want to ever read Christian fiction. She wants to be able to read any fiction, but then figure out what is the underlying worldview that the
Mhm.
author is trying to convey, right? So that kind of reminded me again of what you were talking about, where it's not explicitly like your savior on the page and that they're talking about it in explicit terms, but you're talking about this very informative time of somebody's life, this coming of age where for a lot of people that's where maybe they were raised with a religion and they're having to like really think about it and form it themselves for the first time, or things like that, or they're just dealing with things in the world that they haven't had to deal with before. And so it's kind of more coming from the approach of like, what is your worldview, what are your values, as opposed to, like you were saying, like specific names on pages and things like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing. Yeah, and I think that there's, like you said, like, it's all about finding your target audience, right? And so, like, I definitely believe that that audience is out there and that audience is needed. And so it doesn't have to be explicit. It could be something that you said, like, you got the feedback, like, these are characters that I feel like they will be one day, right? And so somebody who's in that season of life will probably be able to really relate to that of being like, this is how I feel, and I can kind of feel myself going along those same tracks. And I think it'll be really impactful for the people that need to be reading it.
Yeah. Yep. I agree.
Awesome. So then that kind of dovetails nicely with the next question I had for you, which is your authoring journey. How has that changed your perspective on other things in your life? So maybe personal lessons learned, or aspects of being wife and mother, or other jobs that you've had. I love to ask that question as well.
That's a really good question. My fiction tends to bring in family matters a lot, and so it's been interesting to
Uh,
get into the mind of the mom, especially my first series I wrote when I wasn't a mom of teenagers yet. I was, the mom of a baby. So for that character of the mom, I had to really get into like my own mom's head. Like, what was it like when she raised me? And
yeah.
so when I write books, it's an interesting role to kind of, in a way, speaking of religion, feeling like you're, I don't want to sound sacrilegious, but like you're the creator of these characters in a way, right?
Mhm.
And you're creating like what their thoughts are and who they are and who their personality is. And so where I guess I'm trying to go with like creating this mom and her feelings and how she reacts to these girls, or her daughter in the book, it has helped me as a mom because every time I do now have two teenage daughters. And I feel like whenever I'm interacting with them, I'm thinking about the character that I created and,
Mhm.
the times when the mom in my book reacts well, and the time when she reacts poorly based off of maybe my own personal history or just kind of what will bring better drama to the book. But it's affected my real life because I stop and think, I want to be the mom that I would write a good situation with. I want to be the good mom that I would
Aw.
write, right? And I tell that to my daughters all the time too. If they're, struggling with something at school and they're maybe struggling with a friend who's becoming obnoxious and they don't really want to have much to do with that friend, I'm constantly telling them, picture the main character in a book that you're reading or in a movie that you're watching. And how does the main character that you love and you want to be like her, how does she respond to that situation? Because if you're
Mhm.
watching a movie where a girl is just kind of like, that girl's annoying, I don't want to have anything to do with her anymore, she bugs me, and you just ditch her, like, are you going to actually want to read a book about that character? Are you going to even care if she falls in love with the main guy? Or are you kind of like,
Mhm.
I don't like her. I don't want to read this book. We want to read books about main characters that are likable. And the reviews that came across about my first book, Second Kiss, I purposely made that girl a little bit annoying because I wanted her to have growth. I wrote Second Kiss
Mhm.
knowing I was going to write a whole series. I wanted it to be kind of Anne of Green Gable-ish, where like she's maybe a little bit annoying. She's kind of young. She's 14 when it starts. And I wanted to show growth, that she matures. But the
Mhm.
problem was with that is though, even though a lot of people loved that first book, it's probably one of my most popular. I still get the most, even though it was my very first book, I feel like I've become a better author since. That's the book everybody comes back to. Second kiss, second kiss. So I think that there was a sense of vulnerability in it that people liked, but I did get reviews that said, I didn't even care if anything good happened to her because she was so annoying. And I really feel like that's shaped how I write. Like, okay, I want my main character to have weaknesses and flaws because I want it to be real.
Mhm.
But if she's too annoying, nobody's going to be interested in her life. Right. Or if
Right.
she's mean or if she's selfish, nobody's really interested.
Mhm.
Even if you do want your main character to start off as mean and selfish, you kind of have to give your readers a spark of something, some vulnerability that makes us like them, right? Otherwise, we don't care
Mhm.
about their story. So I feel like that has definitely bled into my life as a mom, trying to be the best mom that I could be, trying to be the mom that I would write and be interested in following. And also, just like I said, teaching my kids, like, what decisions do you want to make so that you can be the main character of your story that's actually interesting to read and we care because you're a kind human and you care about others and you're
Mm.
not selfish. So I would say that that's
Yeah.
probably the biggest way it's influenced my life.
Oh man, that I mean, I love that. Like, I mean, I think it's the same reason why like journaling works, right? Maybe to a certain extent, and maybe journaling isn't somebody's cup of tea, but they could very easily do this exercise of imagine the main character of a story you love, right? And then what would they do in this situation? And I think why that is such like a cool exercise to do with kids and even yourself and like I could do it right now with the stuff going on in my life. It's like it teaches you that you don't have to let your emotions be in the driver's seat, like, you can understand how you're feeling and you can sympathize with that character and what they're feeling, and you can sympathize with yourself and what you're feeling, but you have a responsibility of how you let that translate into your actions. And if you let your emotions sit in the driver's seat, you may not like the actions that come out of that, and you may find that character annoying or frustrating for
So
whatever
true.
reason because there's a certain level of separation there. And so you can feel your emotions and you should feel your emotions and you should understand them, but maybe don't let them always dictate your decisions and your actions. And so kind of creating that separation there, it's exactly what you're talking about. I think that's a really fun way to kind of have that conversation with, kids and to use it in your own life. And I'll be writing that down.
Sure. Thank you.
Of course. Yeah. All right. So we're going to wrap up with my favorite question, and it might arguably be one of the most difficult questions, although hopefully many of them haven't been that difficult. But 2 to 3 book recommendations for our listeners.
Oh, I'll probably kick myself later for this because I'll remember a book that I loved even more, but I think is his name. That's one of my very favorite books. He goes through like little writing exercises and just kind of helps you delve a little bit deeper into your writing skills. I've used it several times throughout my books. Um, Separate piece, definitely love, but I would even say, okay, so I'm a huge Jane Austen fan, and I grew up watching Jane Austen films. I
Uh-huh.
finally read the books. I finally got one of those volumes that had all of them in. Even though I'm a English lit major, it would probably surprise people I didn't read those earlier, but I finally broke down and was like, I got to read these, and so much better than the movies. So I would say actually read the Jane Austen novels, don't just watch the movies. Another book, oh, um A Million Miles in 1,000 Years, I think is what it's called. Trying to remember his name off the top of my head. I just read his book again and I cannot remember his name. But
That's all right. I'll find
A
it.
Million Miles in 1,000 Years, his writing style is one of my favorite ever. He's more memoir. So he wrote a book that went big and it was kind of a memoir type book. It was about his life, but kind of in like a story, and some guys came and they wanted to make a movie of his book, but they told him that they had to change some stuff because his life was too boring. So he's like, "What? My life is too boring for this movie." So he goes through this whole journey of trying to make his life more interesting. It's so inspiring, and the way that this guy writes is crazy, and it's really interesting because he actually says in his book, he says, "I don't even like to write. I just love like the whole process of getting my book out there and networking, which is my hardest part. I am not a good networker. I'm happy to just sit in my office and sit behind my computer and not talk to anybody, not try to market my books, which is probably why he's a lot more well known than I am because he's so good at networking. But he's an amazing writer. I wish I could remember what his name
I
was,
think
but
is it
it's not
Donald
really.
Miller?
Yes, Ronald Miller. Ronald, is that what you said? Yes.
Donald, I Googled it. Yeah.
Donald Miller. Yes, thank you.
No, that sounds interesting. I'm gonna have to add that to my reading list.
Yeah, it's a good one. He has a few books that are just the way that that's how I want to be able to write. I love those like deep psychological thoughts that we don't usually like process on the surface, but everybody can relate to, and that's what he's
Yeah,
really good at. So, I love him.
yeah. The thoughts that like, well, oh, we'll just stay surface level here, but you don't
Yeah.
wanna have to, think about it deeper than it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That sounds super
Mhm.
interesting. So we've got writing shapely fiction, recommendations of actually reading any of the Jane Austen novels, and then A Million Miles in a Thousand Years by Donald Miller.
Donald Miller.
So that's a really fun list. I like that. That's something on there for everybody. So that's a great way to wrap it up for us.
Okay, cool.
Awesome. All right. Well, it has been such a pleasure. I really love this. I think we talked about a lot of fun things. Let's see. Where can people find you if they want to get connected with your work?
So I have a website, nataliepalmerbooks.com, and my books are all available on Amazon. My next goal, so I actually don't have any on Audible yet. I like I said, it takes me a lot. I just want to write. That's my biggest thing. So
Yeah.
anytime somebody says, "How can I get my your books in our library?" I'm like, "Well, that would mean that I have to take time to actually publish it onto Ingram Spark, which is not too hard, but it just takes time that
Mhm.
and all the busyness, I just want to write when I have a second. So I will be doing that
Right.
soon. That's a goal, and I will be trying to get something going with Audible books, but for right now, it's just the paperback and Kindle version on Amazon. So,
Perfect. And where can people find you on social media?
Instagram and Facebook, Natalie Palmer Books for both of those.
Amazing. Alrighty. Well, it's been such a joy. And thank you so much for coming on Between the Edits.
Thank you. Your questions were so fun. That was awesome.